The winter of 1962 settles over Toronto with the weight of unspoken truths. Snow falls in thick, silent curtains against the amber-lit windows of the university library, each flake surrendering to gravity's ancient pull. Inside, beneath the golden pools cast by reading lamps, a young graduate student sits surrounded by the testimonies of atrocity, books that lean against each other like exhausted sentinels, bearing witness to humanity's darkest hours. The radiator hisses its rhythmic meditation while outside, the world sleeps beneath its merciful white blanket, unaware that within these walls someone wrestles with the most disturbing question of our species. How do ordinary people become instruments of unspeakable cruelty? You, lying there in the darkness of your own room decades later, carry a different but related burden. Perhaps you replay that moment when you said nothing while injustice unfolded before you. Perhaps you remember the small cruelties you've inflicted, the words that cut deeper than you intended, the silence that became complicity. You wonder if there's something fundamentally broken within you, some shadow that makes you less than good, less than worthy of peace. Your mind circles like ravens around unspoken shame, and sleep feels impossible when conscience keeps its vigil. Tonight, we descend into that very question through the lens of Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist who spent his life mapping the architecture of evil, not in distant monsters, but in the mirror of ordinary human hearts. His insights offer no easy absolution, but something infinitely more valuable: understanding. And in understanding the universal capacity for darkness, you may finally find permission to forgive yourself, to close your eyes and to rest in the shared brokenness of our species. It is 3 a.m, and you are awake. Not the gentle waking of natural circadian rhythm, but the harsh, involuntary consciousness that arrives uninvited, dragging behind it the weight of every mistake you have ever made. The silence of your room is not truly silent, it is a heavy, textured quiet, filled with the rhythmic hum of electricity and the settling of timber. A stillness that seems to amplify the noise within your own mind. Night has settled over your sanctuary like a quiet verdict, and you, the solitary sentinel in a sleeping world, remain on duty, guarding a fortress under attack from your own memory. This is the peculiar burden of the intelligent mind, is it not? The curse of consciousness that transforms simple rest into moral tribunal. Your body lies heavy beneath the covers, yearning for the solace of oblivion. But your mind has become a relentless archivist, descending into the basement of your history to retrieve files you thought were long destroyed. The thoughts circle like ravens, that careless comment that landed with more force than intended. The moment injustice unfolded before you, and you remained silent. The accumulated sediment of small moral failures that have settled in the riverbed of your conscience. Round and round the accusations fly, each one landing with the precision of long practice. What keeps you awake is not merely anxiety about tomorrow's responsibilities. No, what pins your eyes open in the darkness is something far more profound, the unexamined fear of your own capacity for harm. You have scrolled through endless documentation of human cruelty, witnessed how quickly civilization's veneer dissolves, how easily ordinary people transform into instruments of malevolence. And in your most honest moments, in hours like this, when pretense becomes impossible, you wonder about the darkness that lives within your own heart. You wonder what you might be capable of under different circumstances, with different pressures, in different company. But here is what you must understand as you lie there, your mind refusing the mercy of unconsciousness. your very inability to sleep, your exhausting habit of replaying moments of failure, your tendency to ruminate on moral questions. These are not evidence of your corruption. They are evidence of your conscience. The truly malevolent do not lie awake at 3 a.m. wondering if they were kind enough. The narcissist does not lose sleep over harsh words spoken in haste. Your insomnia, painful as it is the friction caused by a working moral compass. You are awake because you care, because you understand the gravity of existence in ways the oblivious do not. This burden you carry, the burden of the sleepless witness, connects you to a man who spent decades in dimly lit archives, absorbing not abstract history, but human voices trembling on the edge of oblivion. Jordan Peterson, younger than his public image, worn by study, haunted by testimonies from concentration camps and gulags, reading not from morbid fascination, but from moral obligation. He suspected something terrible and liberating, that the capacity for evil was not theirs, but ours. Not monsters, but humans frighteningly similar to you. You who cannot sleep because you once lied, once failed, once harmed, however subtly, are already standing at the threshold of the same question that drove him into those archives. You are not simply anxious, you are bearing witness to your own darkness, to humanity's darkness, to the unnerving realization that the line between the two runs directly through your heart. Tonight, we will not try to silence the witness by force. Instead, we will gently invite understanding. Through Peterson's lens, we will explore why you, an essentially decent person, are capable of harm, and why this capacity does not condemn you, but invites you into deeper, more honest goodness. Your very torment over your failures is proof that you remain on the side of light. The war inside you is not evidence that you have lost, but that you are still fighting. The court is adjourned for the evening. You have done your duty as witness. Now you may rest in the complex, beautiful, and difficult truth of being human. You are safe to close your eyes, not to escape who you are, but to find peace in shared brokenness, permission to be flawed, permission at last to sleep. Close your eyes now and travel with me northward, beyond the comfortable cities where warmth is guaranteed, into the vast expanse of northern Alberta, where winter is not merely a season, but a fundamental fact of existence. Here, in towns like Fairview, where Peterson spent formative years, the landscape stretches flat and unforgiving toward horizons that seem impossibly distant. The cold here is not the romantic, picturesque cold of Christmas cards. It is a brutal, bone-penetrating force that transforms breath into ice crystals and teaches harsh lessons about human fragility. This is the geography that shaped a sensitive boy into someone who would spend his life contemplating the architecture of suffering and the necessity of order against encroaching chaos. Imagine the profound darkness of those winters. The sun, when it appears at all, skims the horizon like a reluctant guest for mere hours before plunging the world back into 20 hours of obsidian night. The wind howls across the prairies with nothing to slow its assault, carrying temperatures that plunge to 40 degrees below zero. In such conditions, exposed skin freezes within minutes. Cars refuse to start. The world becomes actively hostile to human existence, a reminder that we are fragile creatures clinging to warmth in a cosmos that offers none. The silence is not peaceful but indifferent, the silence of the cosmos itself vast and uncaring. This is where Peterson learned his first and most fundamental lesson, that the default state of existence is not safety, comfort, or justice. The default state is entropy. The default state is chaos waiting patiently for your fire to go out. Winter there was not inconvenience but existential teacher, stripping away illusions of ease and revealing life as it truly is. A continuous act of defiance against forces that would reduce everything to frozen stillness. When machinery failed in the dead of winter, it was not mere frustration, but potential catastrophe. Survival depended not on abstract ideals, but on discipline, preparation, and sober respect for reality's harshness. You know something of this cold, don't you? Not the meteorological cold of northern winters, but the existential cold that seeps through the cracks of modern life. You feel it in the marrow of your spirit, the exhaustion of burnout, the numbness of depression, the long dark nights of loneliness where no one seems to hear you. You carry a heaviness in your chest that feels like hypothermia of the soul. A slow creeping numbness that makes even small tasks feel like wading through deep, heavy snow. The modern world, for all its technological marvels, often feels like that frozen prairie, vast, indifferent, isolating. Perhaps you have criticized yourself for this weariness. You look at your life and think, I should be stronger, less tired, less overwhelmed. But consider the lesson of the hinterland. If you were standing in that Alberta winter, shivering and exhausted, would you blame yourself for being cold? Would you call yourself weak for finding survival difficult? Of course not. You would understand that the environment is harsh and that keeping warm requires immense energy. Peterson's philosophy begins with this recognition. Your depression, your burnout, your exhaustion are not personal failures, but rational responses to genuinely difficult conditions. The fact that you are tired is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that you are fighting a real battle against the entropy of existence. To simply maintain your position, to rise each morning, to show kindness when you are hurting, to continue caring in an indifferent world, is heroic resistance against the cold. So as you lie here now, let this understanding thaw the frozen judgment you hold against yourself. Feel the warmth of your bed not just as physical comfort, but as profound shelter you have created against chaos. You are not failing because you struggle. You are struggling because existence itself is severe. And yet here you are. You have survived another day, navigated your own hinterland, brought yourself to this place of rest. The metaphorical wind may howl outside, but in here you have earned this warmth. You are safe. You are home. Picture now a different kind of winter, not of wind and snow, but of paper and silence. In the hushed sanctuary of the university library, where fluorescent lights hum their mechanical lullaby and the air carries the weight of dust, binding glue, and the slow exhalation of history. A young man sits surrounded by towers of testimony. The books stacked around Peterson are not the comfortable volumes of literature or philosophy that most scholars prefer. These are archives of hell. Survivor accounts from Auschwitz, documentation from Stalin's purges, the testimonies of Nuremberg, Solzhenitsyn's monumental Gulag archipelago. Each volume contains compressed gravity, the weight of millions of extinguished voices refusing to dissolve into footnote and abstraction. This becomes his obsessive pilgrimage, not from morbid fascination, but from something closer to moral obligation. Hour after hour, Peterson absorbs accounts of ordinary people, teachers, bureaucrats, neighbors, who either perpetrated unspeakable cruelty or witnessed it unfold in paralyzed silence. He reads testimonies of mothers separated from children, of intellectuals forced to denounce their own thoughts, of entire populations learning to speak in whispers because truth had become lethal. He is not studying monsters, he is studying the human condition under extreme pressure, trying to solve the terrifying riddle of how neighbors become informants, how bureaucrats become executioners, how entire societies descend into nightmare while most participants convince themselves they are simply doing their jobs. What drives someone to voluntarily immerse themselves in humanity's darkest chapters? It would be easier to look away, to focus on beauty and progress, to maintain comfortable illusions that such horrors are aberrations. But Peterson suspects something both terrifying and essential, that these atrocities emerged not from exceptional evil, but from ordinary human psychology twisted by ideology and circumstance. He reads because he must understand the mechanism of moral collapse before it snaps shut again. You understand this compulsion, don't you? You too find yourself unable to look away from darkness. Late at night, you scroll through endless documentation of injustice, news feeds that never stop, testimonies of suffering that flood your consciousness, awareness of cruelty unfolding in real time across the globe. Your digital device becomes your own library of atrocities. Smaller in scale perhaps, but no less haunting in its accumulation. Friends suggest you take a break from the news, as if ignorance were viable self-care. But you cannot unsee what you have seen, unknow what you know. This is the burden of the witness, exhaustion that comes not from experiencing trauma directly, but from bearing conscious awareness of it. You absorb the world's pain through screens and stories, and it settles in your nervous system like sediment, layer upon layer, until you can barely remember what it felt like to move through the world with lightness. You lie awake replaying not just your own failures, but humanity's failures, feeling collective guilt for injustices you did not personally commit, but somehow feel responsible for preventing. But here is what Peterson discovered in those archives. What he wants you to understand as you lie there exhausted by moral vigilance, your inability to ignore suffering is not pathology. It is evidence of your humanity. The truly dangerous people are not those who lose sleep over the world's darkness. They are those who sleep soundly while atrocity unfolds around them. Your insomnia, your rumination, your tendency to absorb others' pain, these mark you as someone whose conscience still functions, whose moral senses have not been dulled by convenience or ideology. Evil flourishes not in the presence of witnesses, but in their absence. You, lying awake troubled by moral questions most ignore, are performing the essential human task of bearing witness. Your exhaustion is the price of consciousness in an often unconscious world. You are the watchman, and like all watchmen, you are allowed to sleep. The library must eventually close. You have seen enough for today, born witness, refuse to turn away. Your vigil matters. Your witness counts. Now, having acknowledged what you carry, you have permission to gently close these heavy volumes, just for tonight, and rest in the knowledge that you have done enough. Feel for a moment the center of your chest, that hollow space beneath your sternum where breath gathers and releases. Imagine there exists within you an invisible boundary, thin as a razor's edge, yet profound as a continental divide. It trembles there in the darkness, separating your capacity for tenderness from your capacity for cruelty, your impulse toward truth from your inclination toward deception. This is not metaphor. This is the fundamental architecture of human consciousness. And tonight we must acknowledge what you have spent so much energy trying to deny. In the frozen hell of the Soviet gulag, lying on rotting straw with fever burning through his emaciated frame, Alexander Solzhenitsyn received an epiphany that would shatter comfortable moral categories forever. Surrounded by both victims and perpetrators, watching ordinary people transform under extreme pressure, he realized that evil was not an external infection carried by monsters. He wrote the words that became the cornerstone of Peterson's moral philosophy. The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart, and through all human hearts. Through yours, through mine, through the hearts of saints and murderers alike. You have been conducting a trial in the courtroom of your conscience, haven't you? You categorize people into the virtuous and the wicked, then prosecute yourself with merciless precision, convinced that your failures reveal fundamental corruption. You replay moments of unkindness, episodes of cowardice, instances where you chose comfort over conscience. In the dark theatre of insomnia, you cast yourself as the villain of your own story, believing your capacity for harm makes you uniquely flawed, irredeemably broken. But consider the profound relief hidden within Solzhenitsyn's terrible insight. If this line runs through every human heart, then your darkness is not solitary pathology, but shared condition. The capacity for malevolence that terrifies you exists in your most admired figures, your gentlest friends, everyone you have ever loved. You are not a monster masquerading as a person, you are a person standing on the ancient fault line that runs through all of human history. This line is not static. It oscillates with circumstances, shifting like a living thing throughout your life. In favorable conditions, when you are rested, supported, purposeful, you lean naturally toward compassion. Under pressure, exhaustion, or ideological possession, you drift toward shadow. There are days when patience flows through you like clear water, when you embody your highest aspirations. But there are other days when pain has made you sharp-edged, when resentment has fermented into something toxic, and you recognize a stranger inhabiting your skin. Peterson seized upon this insight because it dissolves the dangerous illusion of moral superiority while offering something infinitely more valuable than false innocence, honest humility. When you accept that you carry both light and shadow, you stop projecting your darkness onto others. You recognize the profound difficulty of remaining good in a world that constantly tests your boundaries. True morality emerges not from the absence of dark impulses, but from conscious recognition and restraint of them. The shame that isolates you is built on a lie. You are not uniquely corrupted. You are universally human. Your guilt over past mistakes is not solitary confinement, but shared burden. Every conscious being who has ever wrestled with moral choice carries this same weight, stands on this same trembling line, faces these same impossible decisions between competing goods and necessary evils. So tonight, offer yourself radical clemency. You need not be perfect to deserve rest. You need not excise your darkness to merit peace. The battle between these forces is the engine of human consciousness, but even soldiers are granted leave. Feel this line running through your chest now, not as evidence of your brokenness, but as proof of your completeness. You are whole in your contradictions, worthy in your struggles, human in the most dangerous and wonderful sense. The line will remain tomorrow. The work of integrity will wait for dawn. For now, you can lay down the gavel, dismiss the court, and rest in the complex truth of your shared humanity. You are allowed to be flawed. You are permitted to sleep. There is a question you have been avoiding, a thought so disturbing that you push it away the moment it surfaces, but in the privacy of this darkness we must finally face it directly. What would you have done? Not what you hope you would have done, not what you imagine your idealized self would have done, but what you, exhausted, afraid, embedded in social structures, desperate to protect those you love, would actually have done if you had been born in Germany in 1920. Or Russia in 1930, or any of the countless places where ordinary people participated in extraordinary evil. Picture now a grainy black and white photograph from the mid-20th century, the kind that haunts museum walls and history textbooks. A group of men in uniform stand casually before a camp gate, some leaning on rifles, others smoking cigarettes. One squints at the camera with the same expression someone might wear at a family picnic. No horns adorn their heads, no demonic glow betrays their nature. They look disturbingly, impossibly ordinary, like people you might pass in a grocery store, sit beside on public transport, work alongside in any modern office building. This is where Peterson insists we begin our most uncomfortable journey, with the horrifying normalcy of those who operated the machinery of genocide. These guards went home each evening to kiss their children goodnight. The functionaries in Stalin's bureaucracy filled out forms that condemned millions to death, then retired to apartments where they drank tea and discussed literature with their wives. They were not mythical monsters, but bookkeepers, neighbors, sons, people exactly like you, placed in circumstances that activated latent capacities for cruelty that exist, dormant, in every human psyche. Hannah Arendt witnessed this phenomenon firsthand when she covered Adolf Eichmann's trial, expecting to encounter pure evil and instead finding a mundane bureaucrat concerned with efficiency and advancement. She termed it the banality of evil, the terrifying realization that monstrosity often wears the face of administrative competence. Evil rarely arrives with thunder and lightning. More often, it arrives with paperwork, social pressure, and the quiet rationalization that one is simply doing one's job. Consider Stanley Milgram's devastating experiments, where ordinary Americans administered what they believed were lethal electric shocks simply because an authority figure in a white coat instructed them to continue. These were not sadists. Many wept, protested, trembled with distress, but they obeyed. They had been taught that obedience was virtue and disobedience was sin. Under the right pressure, they discovered capacities within themselves they would never have imagined possible. Now bring this recognition into the texture of your daily existence. How many times have you remained silent when speaking would have cost you professionally? When have you followed orders that made you uncomfortable, participated in workplace cultures that felt toxic, laughed along with cruel jokes because dissent seemed too risky? These are not accusations but recognitions. You live within structures that reward compliance and punish moral courage, that distribute responsibility so diffusely that no one feels personally accountable for collective harm. The discomfort rising in your chest right now, the resistance against this suggestion, is itself instructive. You want to believe in your own exceptionalism, your immunity to such corruption. But this very certainty is dangerous. Those most convinced of their own righteousness are often most vulnerable to ideological possession. The Nazis believed they were creating a better world. The Soviets thought they were building paradise. Atrocity is rarely committed by people who believe they are doing evil. It is committed by people absolutely convinced they are doing good. This recognition cultivates what Peterson calls informed humility, a sober assessment of your own psychological vulnerability that paradoxically makes you less likely to enact harm. When you accept your capacity for cruelty, you can guard against it. When you acknowledge how easily you might be corrupted, you become vigilant about the small compromises that lead to large betrayals. The monster you see is the monster you can control. So rest now in this uncomfortable wisdom. You are capable of terrible things, and this knowledge is precisely what might save you from doing them. Your sleeplessness over moral questions is not weakness, but the beginning of genuine ethics. Sleep not in innocence, but in watchful humility, knowing that tomorrow offers new opportunities to choose consciousness over convenience, courage over comfort. Imagine a staircase descending into darkness, each step worn smooth by countless feet, the decline so gradual that you might traverse a dozen stairs before realizing you have left the light behind. There exists a comforting fantasy that evil announces itself with thunderclaps and dramatic crossroads, a moment bathed in lightning where you would recognize the weight of choice and select righteousness with heroic clarity. But Peterson's most unsettling insight reveals that moral collapse rarely arrives as catastrophic decision. It comes as imperceptible erosion, one barely noticed compromise at a time, until you discover yourself standing in shadows you never consciously chose to enter. No one wakes up and decides to become cruel. The descent happens through the accumulation of micro-choices, each individually defensible, collectively transformative. It begins almost always with a single lie, not grand deception, but something trivial. A white lie to avoid awkward conversation, an exaggeration to improve your standing, a small truth withheld because honesty seemed inconvenient. The lie works. It smooths social friction, protects your comfort, gets you what you want. And because it works, you tell another, then another. Each successful compromise lowers the threshold for the next, until inauthenticity becomes not aberration, but operating system. You know this architecture of moral erosion intimately, don't you? You remember the first time you compromised a value you thought was sacred. Perhaps you remained silent when someone was treated unjustly because speaking up would have made you unpopular. Perhaps you participated in gossip that damaged someone's reputation because belonging felt more important than protecting an absent person. Perhaps you took credit for work that wasn't entirely yours, rationalized an unkindness, justified a betrayal. At the time, these moments seemed survivable, forgivable, necessary even, just this once, just to get through, just because the alternative was too costly. But here is what you discovered in the privacy of your conscience. Each compromise makes the next one easier. Your internal alarm system, that sensitive instrument calibrated to detect moral deviation, becomes gradually desensitized through repeated exposure to situations you've learned to tolerate. What once would have kept you awake with guilt now barely registers as noteworthy. You descend the staircase, and with each step your eyes adjust to the dimming light until you can no longer remember what brightness looked like. The psychological mechanism is elegant and terrible. Each act of inauthenticity creates internal dissonance. Your actions contradict your self-concept, generating uncomfortable cognitive friction. To resolve this tension, you have two options: change your behavior to align with your values, or change your values to align with your behavior. The first requires courage and often immediate cost. The second requires only rationalization, that most accessible of human talents. So you adjust your internal narrative. You weren't lying, you were being diplomatic. You weren't betraying principle, you were being pragmatic. You weren't choosing comfort over courage, you were picking your battles wisely. Consider how this manifests in your contemporary existence. The job that requires you to compromise your integrity daily, where you've learned to swallow objections and perform enthusiasm for initiatives you find ethically questionable. The relationships where you've become someone slightly false, editing your opinions to maintain peace, suppressing your authentic self to avoid conflict. The accumulating weight of small dishonesties creates an architecture of inauthenticity that manifests as the very anxiety and depression that keep you awake tonight. Your insomnia may be your psyche's last line of defense, refusing to grant you peace while you live in contradiction with yourself. This gradual erosion explains how entire societies descend into nightmare. It wasn't that millions of people suddenly became evil, it was that millions of people made millions of small concessions to untruth. They stopped speaking what they saw, accepted minor injustices as necessary, allowed language to be distorted until the cumulative weight of these surrenders collapsed the entire moral structure of their civilization. But here, in this recognition, lives profound hope. If descent is incremental, so is redemption. You need not transform overnight, need not climb the entire staircase in a single heroic leap. You need only choose differently in one moment, tell one truth you would normally avoid, keep one small promise you might otherwise break. Each act of integrity reverses the direction, strengthens the conscience, rebuilds what erosion has damaged. Tomorrow you might take one step back toward the light. Just one. That is enough. For tonight, rest in knowing the descent can be stopped, the climb can begin, and you are still within reach of grace. Your very worry about your goodness proves you have not fallen beyond recovery. Sleep now, brave climber. The ascent begins again in the morning. Within the sacred chambers of your consciousness, you have been constructing an elaborate dwelling, not from honest timber and true stone, but from the ephemeral materials of deception and performance. Each lie becomes a false wall erected between your authentic self and the world that watches. Each careful omission a hidden corridor leading away from truth. Over years of patient construction, you have built a house so labyrinthine that you can no longer distinguish which rooms contain genuine feeling and which contain mere theatrical display. This is the exhausting edifice that holds you captive tonight. Not external threat, but internal contradiction. The impossible burden of maintaining architectural integrity in a structure built upon foundations of sand. Picture how this construction began. In childhood's tender vulnerability, you discovered that certain truths caused discomfort. Your authentic reactions provoked disapproval. Your genuine needs seemed inconvenient. Your natural responses were deemed inappropriate. So you learned the builder's trade of personality, adding protective walls between your inner reality and outer expression. "I'm fine" became the first partition, installed to shield others from your rawness. Agreement with opinions you privately questioned became another barrier, erected to secure belonging in a world that seemed to reward conformity over authenticity. Each successful deception taught you the craft more thoroughly until you became master architect of your own concealment. Now, decades later, you inhabit a mansion of such complexity that simple movement through your own psyche requires careful navigation. At work, you present the enthusiastic professional who believes in corporate missions your soul finds meaningless, suppressing doubts that might mark you as insufficiently devoted. With family, you maintain the persona they have always known: responsible child, successful sibling, untroubled parent, hiding evolutions of self they might find threatening or incomprehensible. With friends, you curate a version edited for maximum palatability. Laughing at humor you find cruel, endorsing values you privately question, concealing vulnerabilities that might be weaponized against you in moments of future conflict. Peterson understood what your nervous system registers as existential emergency, that every lie, however small, creates structural instability within the psyche. When your words no longer faithfully mirror your perceptions, when your expressions contradict your inner experience, you fracture reality into incompatible versions that demand constant vigilance to maintain. Your body cannot distinguish between the threat of physical predator and the threat of being exposed as fraudulent. Both trigger identical cascades of cortisol and adrenaline, the same activation of ancient survival systems. Except there exists no beast to flee, no battle to win through courage, only the endless, depleting maintenance of contradictory narratives that your deeper self recognizes as unsustainable. This is why slumber eludes you in the darkness. Your mind refuses the luxury of unconsciousness, while it remains divided against itself, perpetually braced for the moment when someone might peer through the carefully maintained facades and discover the trembling authenticity you have worked so diligently to conceal. The anxiety that floods through you in quiet moments is not random malfunction, but alarm signal. Your deepest wisdom crying out that the architecture of lies has become uninhabitable, that the energy required to maintain these false structures is consuming the very life force it was meant to protect. But consider now the radical relief hidden within Peterson's most challenging prescription. Begin telling the truth, or at least cease lying. Not the grandiose truth of prophetic revelation, but the humble, daily truth of authentic preference and genuine feeling. I disagree. I am struggling. I do not know. This troubles me. Each honest statement becomes a room in your internal architecture that requires no maintenance, no energy expenditure, no vigilant protection from discovery. Truth is bedrock, solid, supportive, requiring no constant shoring up against collapse. Lies are quicksand that demand perpetual movement simply to avoid being swallowed by their own instability. The terror, of course, is that honesty will cost you everything: relationships built on pleasant fictions, professional advancement secured through strategic agreement, social belonging purchased with the currency of conformity. But the greater recognition is that the architecture of lies is already costing you something more fundamental: your peace, your vitality, your ability to rest in your own skin. Tonight, in this private sanctuary where no performance is required, you are invited to practice radical authenticity with yourself. Let the masks rest against the wall like discarded costumes. Acknowledge what you actually feel, what you genuinely desire, what you truly believe about your life's current trajectory. No audience watches, no judgment threatens. You are permitted to simply be true, if only to yourself, if only for now. Feel the immense relief of alignment, inner reality matching outer expression, if only in the honest darkness of your own awareness. Here, finally, you can rest on solid ground. There exists within the sacred chambers of your psyche a mask crafted from authentic suffering, molded by genuine injustice and polished smooth by years of careful maintenance. This is not a theatrical prop, but something forged in the fires of real betrayal, shaped by neglect that carved hollow spaces in your developing heart, hardened by cruelties that taught you the world could wound in ways your younger self never imagined possible. Tonight, as you lie here rehearsing old grievances like prayer beads worn smooth by repetition, we must examine together how this mask, initially worn for protection, may have grown so comfortable that you have forgotten the face beneath. Peterson approaches this territory with the delicacy of a surgeon, knowing that beneath every victim identity lies genuine wound deserving of compassion. Your suffering is real. The injustices you endured actually happened. The betrayals that shattered your trust were not imaginary. The systematic disadvantages that blocked your path were not invented. The emotional neglect that left you hungry for validation was not exaggerated. These experiences carved permanent grooves in your neural pathways, shaped your expectations, limited your possibilities in ways that reverberate through your present like aftershocks from ancient earthquakes. You have every right to name what was done to you, to demand acknowledgement, to refuse the gaslighting suggestion that your pain is manufactured or your anger unjustified. But observe what happens when authentic injury calcifies into permanent identity. When wound transforms from something that happened to you into the essential definition of who you are. The victim mask offers seductive rewards that feel like survival itself. When you wear it, others soften their voices, adjust their expectations, make careful room for your fragility. You occupy unassailable moral high ground from which you can judge without being easily judged in return. You cannot understand because you have not suffered as I have becomes both accurate description and conversational trump card that ends uncomfortable accountability. Your pain transforms from private burden into public currency, purchasing exemption from normal standards, explaining every failure, justifying every retreat. More subtly, your suffering becomes weapon as sophisticated as any blade. When disagreement threatens, you deploy your wounds strategically, not consciously perhaps, but with increasing unconscious skill. Your victimization grants permission for passive aggression, emotional manipulation, the extraction of guilty concessions from those who dare challenge your narrative. You create museums of grievances within your consciousness, each exhibit carefully maintained, polished with repeated telling, protected from the erosion of time or the complication of nuance. Every present struggle gets traced back to original harm, every current difficulty attributed to past victimization, until your entire existence becomes organized around what was done to you rather than what you might do next. Peterson's most unsettling insight cuts with surgical precision. This strategy chains you more securely to your oppressors than any external force could manage. By making victimization your core identity, you grant those who harmed you permanent residence in the center of your psyche. They become more powerful in memory than they ever were in reality. Elevated to the status of dark gods whose influence extends across decades, whose shadow falls across every present moment.
You remain perpetually defined by their actions, perpetually reactive to their long-ago choices, perpetually unable to author a story in which you are protagonist rather than eternal casualty. Consider how this manifests in your sleepless hours. Part of your rumination represents legitimate processing of genuine trauma, but notice how some mental rehearsals have become performances, dramatic retellings where you are noble sufferer and they are villains. Narratives that feel almost pleasurable in their moral clarity, their assignment of
absolute innocence to you and absolute guilt to them. You replay these stories not to heal but to reinforce, not to release, but to grip more tightly the identity that explains your struggles, while simultaneously ensuring they continue. The mature alternative Peterson offers requires terrifying courage, acknowledging both your victimization and your capacity to victimize others, both your innocence and your complicity, both what was done to you and what you have done with what was done to you. This recognition does not minimize your suffering, but liberates you from its tyranny. You can honor your wounds without letting them completely define your horizon. You are permitted to be more than your damage, more complicated than your grievances, more powerful than your pain. Tonight, consider loosening the straps of this heavy mask. It has served its purpose, protected you when you were too fragile to stand exposed. But you are stronger now, complex enough to hold multiple truths simultaneously.
You are both wounded and capable of wounding, both innocent and responsible, both shaped by your past and free to shape your future. Rest now in your full dangerous wholeness, not as eternal victim, but as survivor preparing to become something larger than your suffering. Imagine your consciousness as a vast cathedral that has fallen into gentle disrepair, its nave scattered with the accumulated debris of postponed decisions, its sacred spaces dimmed by dust that settles like sediment on surfaces that once gleamed with purposeful attention.
Now, without opening your eyes, feel the geography of the room that holds your weary form tonight. Notice the quiet testimony of objects around you, perhaps clothes draped like sleeping figures over chairs, papers scattered in archaeological layers across surfaces, books leaning against each other in exhausted companionship. Each item whispers its small story about your relationship with the ancient forces of order and chaos, revealing the invisible architecture of your inner landscape made manifest in material space. Peterson's most famous directive, clean your room, has been mocked, trivialized, reduced to internet meme, as if it were merely housekeeping advice offered by an overzealous parent. But you, lying here with your mind circling through its familiar storms of unfinished tasks and unprocessed memories, can feel the profound psychological architecture hidden beneath those three deceptively simple words. The room is not merely the room is consciousness made visible, the external echo of your internal state, the sovereign domain where your will can manifest most directly in the stubborn reality of the material world. Consider the exquisite burden this places upon your nervous system. When your environment descends into disorder, when surfaces disappear beneath layers of postponed decisions, when objects migrate from their proper homes into liminal spaces of temporary placement that becomes permanent neglect, your mind mirrors this chaos with uncanny precision. Each misplaced item becomes a tiny, insistent voice demanding attention, remember me, organize me, deal with me. The accumulated weight of these small voices creates what Peterson recognizes as a low, constant hum in your consciousness, background noise of incompletion that refuses to let your awareness fully settle into peace. This is not moral failing but metaphysical reality. Chaos is the primordial condition, the state toward which everything drifts when attention falters. The universe tends inexorably toward entropy. Buildings decay, bodies age, relationships fray when neglected. Rooms collapse into disarray through nothing more malicious than time's patient passage. To create and sustain order requires continuous resistance against this drift, an endless, quiet war against dissolution. No wonder you are exhausted. You are living in a cosmos that forever unravels while you attempt, in your limited corner, to weave meaning from scattered threads. But here lies the profound hope hidden within Peterson's prescription. Your room represents the one domain over which you possess legitimate, unquestioned sovereignty. The world beyond your walls is vast and uncontrollable. You cannot single-handedly reverse climate catastrophe, heal political divisions, or solve the economic anxieties that keep entire generations awake. These overwhelming concerns paralyze you with their magnitude, leaving you feeling powerless against forces too large for individual influence. But here, in this small square of existence, you are absolute monarch. When you straighten a single stack of books, you assert that order is preferable to chaos. When you fold one shirt with deliberate care, you proclaim, "Here, at least, I have pushed back darkness. Here, my will has manifested in material reality." Each small act of order becomes radical defiance against entropy's patient insistence that effort is futile, that you are powerless against the universe's drift toward disorder. The folded garment, the cleared surface, the made bed, these are not trivial housekeeping, but existential assertions. Evidence that you can affect change in reality, that your actions have consequence, that you possess agency in a cosmos that often feels indifferent to your suffering. The ordered space creates mental bandwidth previously consumed by the anxiety of visual chaos, allowing your scattered attention to gather itself like light focused through a lens. But Peterson's insight extends beyond mere tidiness into the deeper territory of self-respect. The room you neglect is not abstract space, but the literal ground you occupy in the world. Your small corner of being where your choices have immediate, visible impact. When you tolerate disorder in this most intimate domain, you send yourself a continuous subliminal message: I am not worth the effort of care. My environment does not deserve attention. The space I inhabit is beneath consideration. This becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, as the external chaos you accept manifests as the internal disorder that keeps you suspended between sleep and waking in hours like this. Your depression and anxiety often stem not from cosmic meaninglessness, but from abdication of responsibility in the sphere where your influence is clearest and most immediate. You cannot solve global injustice tonight, cannot repair the brokenness you perceive in human civilization. But you can wash a single dish. You can organize one drawer. You can create small islands of order that become sanctuaries against the chaos that threatens to overwhelm consciousness itself. These tiny gestures require no approval from others, no external validation. They are care offered to yourself by yourself. Evidence that you deserve the effort of maintenance, that your corner of existence has value worth preserving. Notice how different this feels from the exhausting burden of performance that depletes your energy throughout the day. Ordering your space is not theatre for external audience, but meditation for internal peace. No critic evaluates your organizational systems. No judge measures the quality of your bed-making. This is sovereignty in its purest form, the quiet authority to shape your immediate environment according to your own vision of what constitutes sanctuary. As you visualize your living space now, allow yourself to imagine approaching it tomorrow with fresh intention. Not overwhelming transformation requiring heroic energy you do not possess, but one deliberate act, a single surface cleared, one corner organized, one small victory against entropy. Each gesture becomes moving meditation, bringing your scattered attention into focused present moment where anxiety cannot easily follow. your hands occupied with purposeful work while your mind finds unexpected quiet in the rhythm of restoration. Rest now in this gentle understanding you are not powerless, not worthless, not beyond the reach of order's healing influence. Tomorrow you may choose one small thing, impose one small structure, create one small sanctuary within the larger chaos. Tonight you are permitted to sleep in the knowledge that order awaits your attention, patient, achievable, offering refuge from the storms that seem so vast. You are needed. Your small acts matter infinitely. Your corner of the world deserves your tender care. Sleep now in this invisible sanctuary of intention, and wake to begin the quiet work of creation once more. There exists a particular species of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical labor, yet leaves you more depleted than any marathon of the flesh, the bone-deep weariness that comes from standing helpless at the edge of infinite chaos, watching civilizations fracture and worlds burn while
Your hands remain pitifully, uselessly small. You know this fatigue intimately, don't you? It settles in your chest like lead as you scroll through endless documentation of suffering you cannot prevent, injustice you cannot correct, entropy you cannot reverse. Wars rage in distant lands while you lie in suburban comfort. Economic systems collapse while you struggle to balance your own modest budget. Environmental catastrophe accelerates while you debate whether your recycling efforts constitute meaningful action or elaborate self-deception.
This is the modern condition that keeps you suspended between sleep and waking, the crushing awareness of your own insignificance measured against problems of planetary scope. Your nervous system, evolved for tribal-sized concerns, buckles under the weight of global consciousness. Every notification becomes another reminder of your apparent powerlessness. Every headline, another accusation of inadequacy. How can you rest when the world seems to writhe in agony beyond your reach? How can you find peace when your individual actions feel like whispers in a hurricane? Peterson gazes directly into this abyss of helplessness and offers something that sounds almost insultingly simple until you grasp its profound psychological architecture. The antidote to chaos is not grandiose heroism, but voluntary responsibility, freely chosen, honestly shouldered, one fragile human commitment at a time. Not the crushing weight of obligations imposed by others, not the impossible burden of saving humanity from itself, but responsibility you offer willingly to existence, because carrying it transforms you from passive victim of circumstance into active agent of order. Consider the exquisite difference between these two postures. When you see yourself primarily as casualty of forces beyond your control, every difficulty becomes insult, every burden evidence of cosmic injustice, every demand another theft of your dwindling energy. Life appears as hostile imposition, something that happens to you while you stand on the sidelines nursing justified resentment. In this stance, chaos grows teeth and claws. It becomes predator that stalks you through sleepless nights, something you can neither master nor befriend. But voluntary responsibility transforms that same chaos into raw material for meaning. The unstructured, indifferent expanse of circumstance becomes field into which you can step as protagonist rather than spectator. When you choose to carry even a small portion of the world's weight, when you decide that some problems, however modest, are genuinely yours to address, you shift from the exhausting question, "Why is this happening to me?" toward the energizing possibility, "What can I do in response to what is happening?" Your insomnia often stems from this unclaimed responsibility festering in the margins of consciousness. Thoughts spin because they have nowhere to land, worries circle because they have not been translated into specific commitments. Vague guilt swirls because you sense you were meant for more than destruction and avoidance. The accumulated weight of broken promises to others, to yourself, to the vision of who you might become, creates what psychologists recognize as cognitive dissonance, the exhausting friction that occurs when your actions contradict your values. Each abandoned commitment sends a signal to your deepest self: my word means nothing. I cannot be trusted even by myself. I am unreliable in the fundamental architecture of my being. This internal chaos manifests as the depression and anxiety that keep you suspended in liminal space between sleep and waking. Your psyche knows, with animal wisdom that precedes conscious thought, that you have abdicated your throne, abandoned your post, retreated from responsibilities that would give your suffering purpose and your existence weight. The meaninglessness you feel is not cosmic verdict, but consequence of voluntary powerlessness. Not universal truth, but result of refusing to exercise the sovereignty you actually possess. But here lies the redemptive possibility that Peterson offers like medicine for the exhausted soul. You can begin again, right now, with one small promise kept. Not transformation of your entire existence, not heroic rescue of civilization from its various catastrophes, but one specific, achievable commitment honored with integrity. Perhaps it means showing up fully for someone who depends on you, a child whose entire world consists of your attention, a partner quietly drowning in their own unspoken fears, an aging parent drifting into loneliness at the periphery of your awareness. Perhaps it manifests in your work, not as blind devotion to corporate machinery, but as commitment to perform your tasks with competence and refusal to participate in corruption, however normalized. These responsibilities may seem painfully small when measured against planetary calamity, yet Peterson insists, echoing ancient wisdom, that the moral structure of reality operates fractally. How you conduct yourself in the smallest arena echoes outward in ways you cannot fully trace. The person who learns to tell difficult truths in intimate relationships becomes slightly more capable of speaking truth in corrupt institutions. The individual who practices fidelity in mundane commitments becomes fractionally less likely to betray trust when systems demand it. The citizen who maintains order in their immediate domain, emotionally, ethically, practically, erodes by degree the fertile soil in which totalitarian nightmares take root. This is not self-sacrifice that depletes, but self-actualization that fulfills through the strange alchemy of purpose. When you voluntarily assume responsibility that aligns with your deepest values, burden transforms into meaning. Obligation becomes expression of who you genuinely wish to become. The weight you carry is no longer imposed from without, but chosen from within. And this makes all the difference between imprisonment and freedom, between suffering that crushes and suffering that dignifies. Consider what small responsibility you might embrace tomorrow. Not world-saving heroics, but humble fidelity to immediate obligation. One difficult conversation engaged rather than avoided. One promise kept despite inconvenience. One person served with attention they deserve but rarely receive. These quiet acts accumulate like drops of water that eventually carve canyons through stone, creating over time the architecture of a life that pushes back chaos, that leaves some corner of existence slightly more ordered than you found it. Your anxiety often stems not from having too much responsibility, but from having responsibility you have not consciously chosen or gracefully accepted. The obligations you fulfill resentfully, the duties you perform while internally rebelling, the expectations you meet through gritted teeth. These create the sense of imprisonment that makes existence feel like sentence rather than gift. But when you voluntarily shoulder commitments that serve something larger than momentary comfort, the same actions transform from burden into meaning-making, from depletion into restoration. So as you lie here in the darkness, feeling small against the vastness of global chaos, remember that the universe does not ask you to fix everything, it asks you to answer for something. Tomorrow offers new opportunity to respond rather than react, to choose rather than drift, to bear the sweet burden of mattering to someone somewhere, in ways that cannot be measured but are infinitely real. This is enough. This is everything. You are needed in ways both humble and profound. Sleep now, knowing that your small corner of responsibility awaits your faithful attention, and that in tending it well you participate in the ancient, ongoing work of creation itself. There exists within the unmapped territories of your psyche a figure you have spent your entire life fleeing, a silhouette composed of everything you have disowned, every impulse you have deemed unacceptable. Every aspect of yourself you have exiled into the darkness beyond consciousness. Carl Jung named this rejected twin the shadow, and Peterson, drawing from this wellspring of depth psychology, insists that your exhaustion tonight stems not from the presence of darkness within you, but from the immense energy required to keep it perpetually locked away. You have become prison guard to your own unacknowledged self, standing eternal vigil against the parts of you that rattle the bars of repression, demanding recognition, integration, homecoming. Picture this shadow as it was forged in the crucible of your early years. You were born wild and whole, containing multitudes, capacity for rage alongside tenderness, selfishness alongside generosity, cruelty alongside compassion. But the world you entered had no patience for such dangerous completeness. Parents flinched at your anger, teachers punished your defiance, peers rejected your strangeness. So you learned the brutal mathematics of survival. Certain parts of you were acceptable, others intolerable. The unacceptable aspects did not disappear, they merely went underground, forming a parallel self that grows in darkness, like mushrooms in a cellar, fed by the very energy you expend trying to deny its existence. Your shadow contains the rage you were never permitted to express, now calcified into passive aggression that leaks out in subtle cruelties you barely recognize as your own. It holds the selfishness you were taught was monstrous, which manifests as resentful martyrdom when you give from depleted reserves, while secretly tallying debts others never agreed to owe. It houses the competitive impulses labeled unseemly, the power drives you learned to disguise as selfless service. Every quality you have judged as unworthy of love has been compressed into this inner exile, and from that place of banishment it exerts influence you refuse to acknowledge, sabotaging relationships through patterns you swear you will never repeat, undermining your own success through mysterious self-defeat. But here, Peterson offers insight that transforms everything. Your shadow contains not only the darkness you fear, but also the strength you have failed to claim. You have exiled not just your capacity for harm, but your capacity for power. Not just your selfishness, but your healthy self-protection. Not just your aggression, but your ability to establish boundaries and defend what matters. In your desperate attempt to be good, to be safe, acceptable, lovable, you have amputated essential aspects of mature selfhood, becoming not virtuous, but merely harmless, not compassionate, but simply weak. Consider how this manifests in your sleepless suffering. Your social anxiety often stems from having no access to healthy aggression that would allow you to take up space unapologetically, to state preferences clearly, to say no without elaborate justification. The depression that keeps you suspended between sleep and waking is often rage turned inward. Anger with nowhere to go but against yourself, because you have deemed it too dangerous to express outward. You have become battlefield where civil war rages between the acceptable persona you present to the world and the unacknowledged shadow that refuses to remain silent. Peterson's prescription sounds paradoxical until you grasp its liberating logic. Become dangerous, then choose restraint. Develop your capacity for aggression, cunning, strategic thinking, not to deploy them carelessly, but to possess them consciously. True goodness emerges not from harmlessness, but from power held in check by wisdom. The person who could destroy, but chooses mercy, is infinitely more moral than the person who simply lacks capacity for destruction. You cannot genuinely forgive until you have developed your ability to seek revenge and consciously chosen to release it. This integration does not mean unleashing your shadow indiscriminately, acting out every repressed impulse in some therapeutic purge. It means bringing these exiled aspects into consciousness, acknowledging them without judgment, recognizing that your capacity for cruelty, manipulation, and violence is not aberration but human inheritance. When you accept that you could harm others but choose not to, that choice carries moral weight. When you acknowledge your selfish desires but elect to serve something larger, that sacrifice has meaning. Visualize now this shadow self approaching through the darkness of your inner landscape. Not as monster, but as lost brother. Not as enemy, but as exiled king returning to reclaim rightful throne. What would it mean to welcome home your healthy anger, your legitimate self-interest, your capacity for necessary ruthlessness? You would become not worse, but whole. Not more evil, but more completely human. Containing all possibilities and choosing consciously among them rather than being unconsciously driven by what you refuse to acknowledge. The exhaustion you feel tonight stems partly from this internal division, the impossible effort of keeping yourself fractured into acceptable and unacceptable, light and dark, conscious and repressed. But wholeness beckons, not as distant achievement, but as present possibility. You can begin simply by acknowledging what you have denied. I am capable of cruelty. I contain selfishness. I possess the capacity to manipulate, to dominate, to harm. And in that acknowledgement, paradoxically, you become less likely to enact these capacities unconsciously, more able to channel them toward purposes that serve rather than destroy. Rest now in this difficult recognition. You are not the angel you have tried to become, but neither are you the demon you fear. You are human, dangerous, powerful, containing multitudes, worthy of your own acceptance. The civil war can end, the exiled can return home. You can sleep as a whole person, rather than fractured guardian of your own rejected self, knowing that darkness integrated becomes strength, and that wholeness, however uncomfortable, is the only foundation upon which genuine peace can be built. There exists a profound paradox at the heart of human consciousness that keeps you suspended between sleep and waking. The very sensitivity that makes existence feel unbearable is precisely what makes you capable of bearing it meaningfully. You know this contradiction intimately, lying here in the darkness, your nervous system registering every nuance of pain that others seem to navigate with inexplicable ease. The social anxiety that transforms simple interactions into elaborate performances of adequacy. The depression that drains color from experiences others find naturally rewarding. The loneliness that persists even in crowded rooms, the exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to cure, the persistent sense that you are somehow failing at the basic human task of simply being alive without constant struggle. Peterson discovered the architecture of this paradox through his obsessive study of Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz not through physical strength, but through something far more mysterious: his ability to locate meaning within meaningless suffering. In the frozen hell of the concentration camps, Frankl observed that survival depended not on circumstance but on consciousness. Those who retained purpose, who connected their agony to something larger than mere endurance, outlasted prisoners with every apparent advantage except significance. The body can bear almost unimaginable torment when the spirit has reason to persist, but comfort without meaning becomes its own form of torture, a slow suffocation that manifests as the very depression and anxiety keeping you awake tonight. This reveals something revolutionary about human nature that Peterson insists you must understand. You do not actually seek happiness in the shallow sense of perpetual pleasure and absence of difficulty. What your deepest self hungers for with aching intensity is meaning, something worth suffering for, purpose that transforms arbitrary pain into necessary sacrifice. Your comfortable modern life can feel unbearable, while others in objectively harsher circumstances report profound satisfaction, because meaning is the alchemical substance that transmutes suffering from curse into crucible, from meaningless torture into sacred task. Consider how this reframes your sleepless struggles. Your insomnia is not simply malfunction, but vigil, time when you wrestle with questions most avoid until crisis forces confrontation. Your sensitivity to the world's pain marks you not as broken, but as conscious in ways others have learned to numb. The depression that whispers arguments for withdrawal may be your psyche's recognition that your current mode of being has become unsustainable, a painful but necessary invitation to transformation. Your capacity to be wounded by existence, to feel the full weight of consciousness, is not pathology but perception, evidence that you register realities others miss or dismiss. Peterson's insight cuts through despair with surgical precision. Your suffering may be precisely what makes you necessary. The universe does not need more people who glide through life untouched by its difficulties, comfortable in their ignorance of how precarious consciousness can be. What existence requires is someone who understands suffering from the inside and chooses, despite that understanding, to remain engaged, to keep caring, to continue showing up, to bear witness with courage rather than retreat into cynical detachment. Your particular form of suffering serves as training for specific service only you can offer. The anxiety that feels like weakness teaches you gentleness with others who struggle invisibly. The depression that seems like failure develops your capacity to recognize and relieve despair in those who suffer silently. The loneliness that feels like punishment prepares you to offer presence to others drowning in isolation. Your scars become qualifications. Your wounds transform into wisdom. Your sensitivity evolves from liability into gift. This does not mean you must seek suffering or romanticize pain. Peterson advocates neither masochism nor martyrdom. Rather, he insists on honest recognition that difficulty is inevitable, and your response to inevitable suffering determines whether it destroys or refines you. You cannot eliminate loss, betrayal, disappointment, or decline, but you can choose what these experiences make of you. Will they embitter or deepen? Will they close your heart or crack it open? Will they convince you that caring is futile or prove that caring is the only response worthy of what can be lost? The shift from meaningless suffering to meaningful sacrifice happens through a simple but profound change in questioning. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" which leads only to resentment and self-pity, you begin asking, "What does this demand of me?" Your pain stops being evidence of cosmic injustice and becomes invitation to growth. Your struggles cease being punishment and become preparation. Your sensitivity transforms from burden into calling. When you voluntarily shoulder responsibility that gives your suffering purpose, the inevitable pains of existence are placed in context that makes them bearable. The parent who sacrifices sleep for a sick child suffers meaningfully. The artist who struggles with creative blocks endures purposefully. You, lying awake, wrestling with existence itself, participate in the ancient human task of bearing consciousness with courage, not despite your pain, but through it, not in spite of your sensitivity, but because of it. So tonight, instead of fighting your suffering as enemy, invite it to teach you what it came to reveal. Your depression may be preparing you to guide others through their darkness. Your anxiety may be developing your capacity to protect what is precious. Your insomnia may be the space required for integration that daylight prevents. The meaning may not be apparent yet. The purpose may still be unfolding, but your willingness to endure while remaining open, to hurt while continuing to care, is itself heroism that the comfortable will never understand. Rest now in this difficult recognition. Your suffering is not cosmic mistake, but participation in the fundamental work of consciousness. You are needed precisely as you are, wounded, weary, but still here, still trying, still willing to face another day despite knowing its difficulties. The weight you carry is not punishment, but preparation for service you cannot yet imagine. Sleep now, knowing that your pain serves purposes larger than your understanding, and that meaning dwells not beyond suffering, but at its very center, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look. There exists in the sanctuary of your darkened room a particular species of silence, not the gentle quiet of a resting world, but a dense, pressurized stillness, filled with the accumulated weight of every word you have never spoken. They hover above you like restless spirits, the apology that died in your throat, the boundary you never established, the dissent you swallowed to preserve false peace, the authentic response you edited into acceptable approximation. Your body lies horizontal beneath the covers, but your unsaid truths pace like caged animals within the confines of your consciousness, their restless energy manifesting as the anxiety that keeps you suspended between sleep and waking. You call this insomnia. Peterson calls it, more precisely, the neurological cost of systematic self-betrayal. In his obsessive study of totalitarian nightmares, Peterson discovered a pattern so consistent it approached natural law. Every descent into collective madness began not with violence, but with the systematic corruption of language itself. Before the gulags filled with bodies, words were emptied of meaning.
Before the camps consumed millions, entire populations learned to speak in careful euphemisms that concealed reality behind acceptable fictions, to voice enthusiasm they did not feel, to suppress observations that contradicted official narratives. The machinery of atrocity requires mass participation in lies, not dramatic falsehoods, but the accumulated sediment of small dishonesties, words spoken without belief, realities acknowledged privately but denied publicly, the gradual divorce between what is seen and what may be safely said.
You understand this corruption intimately. though perhaps you have never named it so starkly. Your life has become elaborate performance, where authentic speech feels impossibly dangerous, where you have learned to translate genuine perceptions into socially acceptable approximations. At work, you voice enthusiasm for initiatives your soul finds meaningless, nodding agreement while internally dissenting, performing conviction you do not feel. In relationships, you suppress observations that might create conflict, editing your experience to avoid uncomfortable conversations, choosing pleasant fiction over difficult truth. Even alone in your own mind, you have learned to lie to yourself, reframing cowardice as wisdom, calling avoidance prudence, disguising fear as sophisticated diplomacy. The psychological toll of this chronic inauthenticity manifests as the very symptoms that brought you to seek solace in this late hour. Your nervous system registers every suppression of truth as existential threat, flooding your body with stress hormones designed for immediate physical danger. But there is no predator to flee, no battle to win through courage, only the exhausting maintenance of contradictory narratives, the perpetual vigilance required to remember which version of yourself you presented to whom. The cognitive burden of keeping your fractured selves from colliding in ways that might expose the elaborate architecture of your inauthenticity. When your words no longer faithfully mirror your perceptions, reality itself becomes unstable ground beneath your feet. Peterson's prescription sounds terrifyingly simple until you grasp its liberating implications. Speak the truth, or at least stop lying. Not the grandiose truth of prophetic revelation, not performative honesty designed to shock or wound, but humble fidelity to your actual perceptions, your genuine feelings, your honest assessment of what you observe. I disagree. I am struggling. I do not know. This troubles me. Each authentic statement becomes act of resistance against forces that demand your complicity in collective delusion, small rebellion against systems that require your silence for their continuation. The terror, of course, is that truth will cost you everything. You have witnessed what happens to those who speak inconvenient realities. They are isolated, punished, cast out from communities that reward conformity and penalize deviation. Your silence feels like survival strategy, carefully cultivated wisdom about navigating dangerous social terrain. But in the privacy of this darkness, you can acknowledge what your body already knows. Your silence is consuming something essential within you. Your careful lies are devouring the very vitality they were meant to protect. Consider what happens when you speak one small truth you would normally suppress. The moment of speaking carries terror. Your heart races, your voice trembles, every instinct screams to retreat back into comfortable dishonesty. But notice what follows. A peculiar lightness, as if some weight you did not know you were carrying has been set down. Truth requires no maintenance, no elaborate memory of contradictory claims, no exhausting performance of conviction you do not feel. Reality becomes solid ground you can stand upon without constant vigilance. Tonight, in this sanctuary, where no performance is required, practice the radical act of internal honesty. What do you actually feel about your life's current trajectory? What observations have you been suppressing because they complicate comfortable narratives? You need not broadcast these truths to unprepared audiences, need not sacrifice all comfort on the altar of radical honesty. You need only begin by refusing to lie to yourself, by acknowledging privately what you see clearly, by honoring your own perceptions even when they contradict consensus reality. The void you speak truth to is not merely external audience, but the abyss of meaninglessness that opens when language becomes unmoored from reality. Your honest words, however trembling, however imperfect, are threads that tether consciousness to something real, preventing complete dissolution into relativism where nothing means anything. Each authentic statement is act of faith that reality exists, that your perceptions have validity, that genuine communication between consciousnesses remains possible. Rest now in this quiet covenant with yourself. Tomorrow you will try to be slightly more honest than you were today. You will say one true thing. You will refuse one small lie. The integration of truth begins internally before it can manifest externally, and your commitment to authenticity can begin here, in the honest silence of your own heart. Sleep comes more easily to those who no longer exhaust themselves maintaining contradictory worlds, who have chosen alignment over performance, integrity over convenience. You are permitted to sleep on the solid ground of truth, however imperfectly spoken, however quietly practiced. There exists a particular moment of recognition that visits you in the liminal spaces between sleep and waking, a sudden, almost painful awareness that you are irreducibly, impossibly you. Behind your eyes sits a point of consciousness that has never existed before in the entire history of the cosmos, and will never exist again when your heartbeat finally stills. In that fragile instant of recognition, you feel both your crushing insignificance against the vast indifference of space and time, and your unbearable importance as the precise center of your own experiential reality. You are simultaneously nothing, a brief flicker in endless darkness, and everything, the universe becoming conscious of itself through the narrow aperture of your particular awareness. This paradox is what keeps you suspended in the darkness tonight, wrestling with questions of worth and meaning that seem to have no comfortable resolution. Peterson calls this the mystery of the divine individual. Drawing from the deepest wells of Western philosophical and religious tradition to make a claim that feels both terrifying and liberating, you are not merely biological accident, not simply another replaceable unit in the collective machinery of existence, but a sovereign consciousness carrying something sacred within the architecture of your being. This is not the shallow divinity of New Age affirmation, but the profound metaphysical assertion that individual human consciousness participates in the ongoing creation of reality itself. You are the arena where the eternal battle between order and chaos is fought, where good and evil contend for supremacy, where infinite possibility collapses into specific, consequential choice. Consider how this recognition challenges the forces that would reduce you to demographic category, statistical average, or replaceable component in systems that care nothing for your particularity. The modern world excels at making you feel dispensable. Your social media feeds measure worth in metrics of engagement. Your workplace treats you as human resource. Your culture evaluates you through productivity and appearance and ability to generate attention in economies designed to harvest your consciousness. These systems teach you to internalize the message that your value is contingent, earned, dependent on external validation. No wonder you lie here feeling worthless, invisible, quietly erased by structures that profit from your self-doubt. But Peterson insists on something revolutionary that your exhausted soul desperately needs to hear. Your worth is not contingent upon achievement, not dependent on recognition, not measured by any external metric. You carry intrinsic value simply by virtue of being conscious, of bearing the burden of awareness in an unconscious universe. The very capacity to question whether your life has meaning is itself evidence of your cosmic significance. Your ability to suffer, to doubt, to feel the weight of moral choice, these mark you as participant in the fundamental drama of existence, the miracle that transforms dead matter into meaningful experience. This recognition transforms your loneliness from abandonment into sovereignty, from isolation into the necessary condition for dignity. You are alone in the irreducible sense that no one else can live your life, make your choices, or carry your specific burden of consciousness. But this aloneness is your glory. Only an individual can be free, can be responsible, can choose goodness when evil would be easier. The universe tilts microscopically toward heaven or hell based on your decisions in each moment. Your small acts of integrity rippling outward in ways you cannot trace, but which nevertheless alter the fabric of reality. Think of the time someone's unexpected kindness pulled you back from despair. They likely have no memory of it, considered it trivial. Yet your life bent differently because they existed and acted as they did. Now invert the lens. Somewhere, perhaps many times, you have been that person for someone else without realizing it. Your presence has already altered other lives in ways you will never fully know. Your refusal to participate in collective lies creates space for others to speak truth. Your willingness to bear suffering meaningfully makes endurance slightly more possible for those who witness your example. So tonight, feeling small against vast indifference, remember that you are not merely in the universe, but the universe is in you. Every atom in your body forged in the heart of dying stars. Your consciousness, the leading edge of reality, becoming aware of itself. You need not earn your right to exist through endless striving, need not prove your worth to the void. You simply are, and this is miracle enough. Rest now in your divine particularity, your sovereign selfhood. Knowing the universe itself benefits when you are restored, whole, at peace. Tomorrow offers new opportunity to exercise the terrible freedom of choice. But tonight you are permitted to simply be. Not as achievement, but as gift. Not as burden, but as wonder. The intellectual pilgrimage has reached its sacred terminus. And the questions that seemed so urgent mere hours ago now drift like autumn leaves settling into still water. You have journeyed with me through the frozen hinterlands of existence, descended into archives of human darkness, confronted the shadow that dwells within your own heart, and stood before the terrifying responsibility of your divine individuality. We have wrestled with meaning, examined the architecture of lies, traced the delicate line between good and evil that trembles through every human consciousness. But now, analysis must surrender to something older than thought, deeper than philosophy, more fundamental than the restless mind that has carried you through these explorations. Feel how your body has been waiting patiently for this moment, this permission to stop solving, stop questioning, stop bearing the exhausting weight of moral vigilance. The courtroom of conscience is finally adjourning. The books of judgment are closing with gentle finality. Peterson's voice, which has guided you through such difficult terrain, begins to fade like an echo in a vast cathedral, his insights dissolving into the deeper wisdom of silence itself. There is nothing more that must be understood tonight. You have done enough thinking, enough analyzing, enough wrestling with the fundamental questions of existence. Imagine yourself now standing at the shore of an infinite dark ocean. This is the great unconscious, the primordial waters from which all consciousness emerged, and to which it returns each night in the sacred ritual of sleep. The waves lap gently at your feet, with the rhythm of your own breathing, their ancient cadence matching the eternal tide that preceded your birth and will continue long after your final exhalation. Here, at this threshold between waking and dreaming, you are invited to release your grip on the solid ground of reason and allow yourself to drift into waters that have held every weary soul since the beginning of time. This is the completion of the hero's journey Peterson spoke of. Not the dramatic victory over external monsters, but the quiet surrender that follows every descent into darkness. You have faced your shadows, integrated your contradictions, accepted the terrible burden of being human. Now comes the final stage, the return to the source, the dissolution of the questing self into something larger and infinitely more peaceful. You are permitted to stop being the hero of your own story. You can simply be the breath, the heartbeat, the gentle rhythm of existence continuing without effort or intention. Notice how thought itself is becoming less linear, less insistent, softening at the edges like watercolors bleeding into wet paper. The sharp distinctions between good and evil blur into grey mist. The line through your heart becomes permeable, the judgment dissolving into something gentler than forgiveness, simple acceptance of what is. Your muscles release their vigilant tension, gravity reclaiming you with maternal insistence. Each part of your body surrenders its daily burden, shoulders dropping, jaw unclenching, hands opening like flowers, eyes growing heavy with the sweet weight of approaching sleep. Let the abstract images come now. The strange, nonsensical comfort of dreams beginning to whisper their wordless language. A staircase spiraling into starlight. Doors opening onto fields of infinite peace. Books whose pages are made of flowing water. These visions require no interpretation, no analysis, no understanding. They are simply the mind's way of crossing the bridge between consciousness and the deeper rest that awaits beyond thought itself. The darkness behind your eyelids is not empty, but infinitely full, pregnant with peace, heavy with the accumulated rest of ages. It is the velvet curtain drawn across the stage of existence, signaling that the performance is over for now. The actors have removed their masks, the lights have dimmed, the audience has quietly dispersed. You are alone in the most blessed sense, safe, sheltered, hidden from all demands, held by forces older than civilization, more reliable than any human promise. Drift deeper now into this welcoming void, where the self dissolves into rest, where Peterson's insights transform into pure sensation, where philosophy becomes the simple rise and fall of breath. You have done enough. You have been enough. You have thought enough. The struggle is suspended, the questions can wait until morning, the world will continue its ancient rotation without requiring your vigilance. Sleep now. Sleep. Let the waves of unconsciousness carry you beyond the reach of analysis, beyond the burden of being an individual consciousness wrestling with impossible questions. You are held. You are safe. You are permitted to simply drift into the great healing darkness. That asks nothing of you except trust. Sleep, sleep, sleep.